Alright, hello everyone. Today we are going to cover a new topic called list comprehensions, which is a new way to create lists that we haven't learned about yet. So, let's get started. So before we talk about this new way to create lists, let's review how to do it in the first place. So let's say I want to make a list that stores the numbers 0 through 4, and I want to use a for loop. I could use code that looks like this to do just that. I could say my list is an empty list, and then for each I in my range 5, that's going to give me 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm going to append that value I to my list. So for each of those values, add it to the list. And then we can print our list. If we see though, this method is going to take 3 lines of code. Would you believe me if I told you that we could do this with only 1 line of code? You would have to, because that is the content of today's lesson. So today we are talking about list comprehensions, and they let us create a list using a for loop in only 1 line of code. So here's how the format for that looks. We have 2 options, and you'll see why in just a second. So we're creating our variable myList, and first thing you'll see are those square brackets. So the square brackets are telling us and telling Python, hey, we are making a list here. So whenever you see square brackets like this, we are making a list. The next thing is that for loop. We have both different styles of for loop, so we can do either type here. So we have for I in range of a number, or we can do for element in a list, do something, right? But where is the something we want to do? We don't have a colon at the end, and we don't have a body inside of our for loop, because this is all in 1 line. So the thing that we're doing is this operation. And the operation is going to represent the value that we want to append to the list each time that loop runs. So let's look at some examples. So if I say my list equals I for I in range 5, that for loop is going to work the exact same as it would normally. We're going to do 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we're going to give our list the value for I each time we are in the loop. So I starts at 0, we're going to add 0 to our list, and so on and so forth. So we get the list 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, just like we had at the beginning, except in only 1 line of code instead of in 3. Now we can do calculations with our variable I as well. So I can say I times 2, and then each time in my for loop, with that same loop, we're going to, instead of just adding I, we're going to add double of I. So we can add 0, and then 1 times 2 is 2, and then 2 times 2 is 4, and so on. We're going to add even numbers to our list. Now I'm going to throw back to the assignment from last module, the checkerboard assignments, where they had a function predefined to print out the board nicely. And there was a line of code in there that used a concept that you hadn't learned yet. And hey, here we are learning about it today. So I've copied their code and I've simplified it a little bit. It's the same, it does the same thing, but I changed the type of for loop so that it reads a little bit more nicely. So our function is going to accept a board as a parameter, and let's assume that this is our board. I know that's smaller than the ones we made in that assignment, whatever. This is our board for right now. So for each row in our board, we want to join that row and print it. However, the join function only works when each element in the list is a string, and our board is comprised of rows of integers. So what we need to do is we need to make a list copy of that row where that copy has the same values except as strings instead of as integers. So we're going to use a list comprehension here to create that list we're going to do that comprehension. So for each number in the row we're looking at, so we're looping over our rows, and here we're going to loop over the values in that row. So for each number in that row, we're going to append to this list we're creating here the string version of that number we're looking at. So then we can use that list as our parameter for our join. So when we call join with this list, each of those strings, those string versions of our numbers, will get concatenated with the space, and it'll get printed out nicely, giving us that nice layout you saw when you ran your programs in the checkerboard assignment. Now we're allowed to even do more complex things with an operation. We can check if a value is true or false. We can do a Boolean comparison and save true or false into a list. So we can make our list is even, and it's going to equal to list comprehension I mod 2 is equal to 0. We're going to check, does the current value of I divide evenly by 2? This is going to give us true or false. It's going to equal true or false when it finishes running. So for each of the values in I in range 5, we're going to check, is this number even? So when I is 0, 0 divided by 2 has no remainder. That's true. 1 divided by 2 is not even, so that's false, and so on and so forth. Now, we're not going to get into any more complex applications here, but it's possible to use if statements within a list comprehension. So I'm going to challenge you, if you want to accept the challenge, I'm going to challenge you to recreate the checkerboard V3 board, the one with 3 rows of alternating ones and zeros, and then 2 rows of zeros, and then 3 rows of alternating ones and zeros again. Can you do that in only 1 line of code? It's possible. I've done it. So if you want to accept that challenge, go ahead and shoot me the email of your completed code. So something that is going to be helpful for at least one of the assignments in this module, and something that I've shown some of you but never actually introduced to the whole class, is the idea of stacking operations on top of each other, one after the other, all in the same line. So the key to this idea is knowing that any string or list function can be called on any string or list value. They don't need to be stored in a variable yet. And this lets us do what I call operation stacking. We're calling one function after another, all on one line of code. And this is going to let us save lines of code in the long run, and that makes our code more compact and more readable, which is always nice. So I'm going to show you this example, which takes 4 lines, and on the next slide I'm going to show you how to turn it into 1 line of code. So we have our name equals input. We're getting an input from the user, asking them for their full name. On the next line, we're going to call our capitalize function on that name variable and save over it. So we're capitalizing their name. We're going to split it. We're going to turn each word in their name into a separate value in a list. So our name is now a list. So if we grab element 0 out of it, that's going to grab the first name that they entered. So we can save that into a variable called first name. Now we can do all of this on 1 line of code like this. So if I say my first name variable, we're only going to make one variable here. We're all doing this all on 1 line. So when we have operations stacked like you have here, they're going to happen in order from left to right. Unlike when we had functions inside of functions, where they went from inside to out, when they're stacked on top of each other, one after the other, they're going to go from left to right. So in order, here's what's going to happen. We're going to call our input function. The user's going to type something in. Let's assume they enter the name Marvin Delto. It's a random fun name. So that input function is going to return that string, Marvin Delto. The capitalize function is allowed to be called on string values. So we're going to call capitalize on that string, Marvin Delto, and that's going to give us the string Marvin Delto, because capitalize will return the value that after you've capitalized it. So we've got our string Marvin Delto now. Then we're going to call our split function on that string, So our split is going to take this string that we have and turn it into a list where each word in our string becomes its own element. So split's going to give us the list Marvin, Delta. And then lastly, those square brackets, we're going to grab index 0 out of the list that's returned by split. So split returns that list Marvin Delta. Element 0 is that string Marvin. So that is what that 0 is going to give us. So we've done all of the operations on that one line, which lets us save that value at the end into our variable first name. We don't have to store any of those intermediate steps because we don't care about them. All we cared about getting was the first name that they entered in the input. So that's going to be it for our lesson. Thanks for tuning in.